My daughter said that her father's new wife isn't a failure like me, until I took everything away from her. The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable carefully aimed to inflict maximum damage. 12-year-old Iris stood in my cramped kitchen, arms crossed defiantly, her posture and tone an exact replica of the woman who'd been systematically poisoning her mind for months. Stepmom says you gave up on everything important in life. That's why dad had to leave you behind. She says successful women don't make excuses or blame other people for their problems. They take responsibility and make things happen. I set down the chipped ceramic plate I was washing, my hands trembling as soapy water dripped steadily onto the cracked linoleum floor. The dish towel hung limply from the broken cabinet handle, another small repair I couldn't afford to fix. The fluorescent light above the sink flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows across the tiny space that served as our kitchen, dining room, and homework station. I'd been divorced from her father for 3 long years now. During that endless stretch of awkward custody exchanges and stilted conversations, I'd watched him transform into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the man who used to fall asleep on our secondhand couch after working double shifts at the warehouse, his work boots kicked off by the door, and his dinner plate balanced on his chest. Now he wore tailored suits that cost more than I made in 6 months and drove a black Mercedes that gleamed like obsidian in the afternoon sun. All of this transformation had happened courtesy of his marriage to Patricia, the corporate lawyer who lived in a sprawling suburban mansion that could comfortably fit our entire apartment complex in its marble foyer. She was everything I wasn't, everything I'd never had the chance to become, and she made sure Iris understood the difference in excruciating detail. Every other weekend, when my daughter returned from their pristine palace with its manicured lawn and 3-car garage, she brought back carefully curated stories about stepmom's incredible achievements. The tales grew more elaborate and pointed each time, like she was reciting from a script that had been revised and perfected through multiple rehearsals. Patricia closed another $1 million merger this week, and the senior partners are already talking about making her the youngest person ever promoted to managing partner. She's getting written up in the legal journal next month for her innovative approach to corporate restructuring. Patricia says women who work hard and make smart decisions get everything they deserve in life. The implied comparison was never subtle or accidental. I was a waitress at Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour greasy spoon that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead and scrambled eggs to truckers, factory workers, and insomniacs for barely above minimum wage. I dropped out of college in my sophomore year when I discovered I was pregnant with Iris, trading my dreams of becoming an elementary school teacher for the harsh reality of raising a child with a man who wasn't remotely ready to be a father. My 15-year-old Honda Civic had over 200,000 miles on its odometer, the exhaust pipe held together with industrial duct tape and desperate prayers. The passenger side window was permanently stuck half open, requiring plastic sheeting and tape during winter months. Our apartment was a 1-bedroom unit above Mrs. Chen's 24-hour laundromat, where the massive industrial washing machines rumbled and churned through the night, while the perpetual smell of fabric softener and industrial bleach had permanently embedded itself in our clothes, our furniture, and our lives. In my daughter's 12-year-old worldview, carefully shaped by months of Patricia's psychological manipulation, I represented everything shameful and weak, everything she'd been systematically taught to view as cautionary tale rather than loving sacrifice. Honey, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the way my hands were shaking, did stepmom actually use the word failure when she was talking about me? Iris shrugged with the casual cruelty that only children can master when they're repeating adult conversations they don't fully understand. She said some people choose to be victims instead of taking control of their lives and making something meaningful happen. That dad deserves someone who matches his ambition and doesn't constantly drag him down with negativity and excuses. My chest tightened like someone was systematically squeezing my ribcage with iron bands. The familiar weight of inadequacy settled across my shoulders like a lead blanket. And what do you think about all of that? I think she's completely right, Iris said, her voice carrying that cold, matter-of-fact tone that children use when they're delivering devastating truths they don't realize will shatter hearts. Look at this place, Mom. She gestured broadly around our tiny living space with its mismatched furniture salvaged from garage sales and thrift stores, the peeling wallpaper I'd tried unsuccessfully to cover with discount store artwork, and family photos in dollar store frames. Look at your job serving coffee to strangers. Look at your car that sounds like it's dying every time you start it. Patricia says if you'd really tried, if you'd really cared about our family, maybe Dad wouldn't have needed to find someone better. The words landed like individual physical blows, each one carefully aimed and delivered with surgical precision. I could hear Patricia's voice in every syllable, see her perfectly manicured hands gesturing dismissively as she delivered these poisonous observations to my impressionable child. This wasn't Iris speaking. This was a 12-year-old girl repeating the sophisticated psychological warfare of a grown woman who understood exactly how to destroy a mother-daughter relationship from the inside out. That night, after Iris retreated to her small bedroom to video chat with friends from her father's expensive neighborhood, children whose mothers drove luxury SUVs and wore designer clothes to school pickup, I sat alone at our scratched kitchen table and allowed myself to fall apart completely. The tears came in waves, each one carrying a different flavor of grief. I cried for the dreams I'd abandoned when I chose to become a mother at 19. I cried for the college degree I'd never finished, the teaching career I'd never started, the life I'd never built. But mostly I cried because I could feel my daughter slipping away from me like sand through desperate fingers, and I had no idea how to hold on. She was ashamed of me, ashamed of our humble life, our secondhand furniture, our discount store groceries, ashamed to bring friends to our apartment above the laundromat, or introduce them to her waitress mother who smelled like coffee and industrial cleaning products. In her young mind, love was becoming conditional on success, measured in dollar signs and status symbols, and I was failing every single test. Patricia had everything I didn't and flaunted it with calculated precision. According to the stories Iris repeated with wide-eyed admiration, stepmom held a law degree from Harvard University, earned through sheer determination while working multiple jobs to support herself. She occupied a corner office on the 37th floor of a downtown skyscraper, commanding six-figure fees from corporate clients who sought her expertise in complex merger negotiations. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of designer suits that cost more than I earned in 3 months. She drove a BMW that she'd paid for in cash, lived in a house featured in architectural magazines, and maintained investment portfolios worth more than most people's retirement funds. She took Iris shopping at exclusive boutiques where a single dress cost what I spent on groceries for an entire month, buying her expensive electronics and designer clothes that made her the undisputed envy of every girl in her 7th grade class. Most painfully, Patricia was systematically building an elaborate relationship with my daughter based entirely on everything I couldn't provide: wealth, status, intellectual sophistication, and the kind of material success that American society had taught us to worship above all other values. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal dinner conversation at our fold-out table. Iris had spent the weekend at her father's house and returned with what felt like a carefully rehearsed speech about her future living arrangements. Their house has an Olympic-sized swimming pool and a regulation tennis court, she said, picking disinterestedly at the tuna casserole I'd made from a recipe I'd found in a dollar store cookbook. And Patricia's teaching me about real estate investing and portfolio management. She says I should learn about money and business and financial planning since you never bothered to teach me anything practical or useful about the real world. I work 2 jobs to keep us afloat and food on this table, I said quietly, feeling each word stick in my throat like broken glass while the industrial washing machines rumbled beneath our feet. Patricia works 1 job and makes more money than you'll see in your entire lifetime, Iris shot back with the devastating matter-of-factness that only children can achieve when they're delivering crushing truths. She says it's all about making smart choices and strategic decisions instead of making excuses and blaming circumstances beyond your control. She paused, then delivered the final blow with surgical precision. I want to live with Dad and stepmom permanently. I've already talked to them about it, and they think it would be better for my future opportunities and educational development. That night, something fundamental and irreversible shifted inside my chest, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. I wasn't going to passively watch this woman systematically destroy my relationship with my daughter through lies, manipulation, and psychological warfare disguised as helpful guidance. If Patricia wanted to play games with my family's future, I was going to learn the rules and beat her at her own sport. I sat down at my ancient laptop, a machine I'd bought secondhand 3 years ago, and that took 5 minutes to boot up properly, and began researching Patricia's law firm with the methodical determination of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. According to the firm's professionally designed website, she worked for Hendricks, Moore & Associates, one of the most prestigious corporate law practices in the state. The site featured her photograph prominently on the partners page, a glamorous headshot that made her look like she belonged in a magazine spread about powerful women breaking glass ceilings in male-dominated industry. Her biographical information read like something from a fairy tale about the American dream realized through pure determination and unshakable willpower. Born to working-class parents in rural Indiana, she'd earned a full scholarship to Harvard University where she'd studied political science while working multiple part-time jobs to support herself financially. She'd then attended Harvard Law School, graduating in the top 5% of her class before accepting a position with a prestigious Boston firm specializing in international corporate law. After 3 years of corporate litigation in Massachusetts, building an impressive track record of successful defenses for Fortune 500 companies, she'd relocated to our city to join Hendricks, Moore & Associates as a senior associate, specializing in complex merger negotiations and corporate restructuring. The website listed her recent cases: million-dollar deals involving major corporations, successful defenses of multinational conglomerates, and innovative legal strategies that had earned recognition from professional organizations and law journals. But something nagged at me as I read through the carefully crafted biography. The language seemed too perfect, too polished, like it had been written by someone trying very hard to sound impressive rather than simply stating facts. The accomplishments were extraordinary but vague, lacking the specific details that would typically accompany such a distinguished career. I decided to dig deeper into her educational background. I started with Harvard University's online alumni directory, searching for Patricia Whitman in their law school records. The database was comprehensive and well-maintained, including graduates from the past 30 years with their current contact information, professional achievements, and contributions to the university community. Her name wasn't there. I tried different variations and potential misspellings: Patricia White, Patricia Whitfield, Patty Whitman, Pat Whitman. I searched by graduation year, by undergraduate institution, by area of legal study, by academic honors. After 2 hours of exhaustive searching through multiple databases and cross-referencing systems, I found no record of any Patricia matching her description ever attending Harvard Law School during the time frame she claimed. Curious and increasingly suspicious, I expanded my search to include other prestigious law schools that would have produced the kind of high-achieving attorney she claimed to be. Yale Law School, Stanford Law, Columbia University, University of Chicago Law School, Northwestern, all institutions that attracted the brightest legal minds and produced partners at major corporate firms. Still nothing. No Patricia Whitman appeared in any of their alumni directories or graduation records. I called Harvard's registrar office the next morning during my break at the diner, claiming to be conducting employment verification for a potential high-level job candidate. The administrative assistant was helpful, but absolutely definitive. No Patricia Whitman had graduated from Harvard Law School in the years I specified, and no one matching her description or background appeared in their comprehensive record system. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone in the employee break room. If Patricia hadn't attended Harvard Law School, or apparently any other prestigious law school, where had she gotten her legal education? More importantly, was she actually licensed to practice law at all? I spent my lunch break at the public library, using their faster internet connection to search the State Bar Association's comprehensive database. Every licensed attorney in the state was required to register with the Bar Association, maintaining current contact information, continuing education records, disciplinary history, and specialization certifications. Patricia Whitman didn't appear in their database either. I tried multiple variations of her name, searched by firm affiliation, browsed through recent bar exam results in case she'd been recently licensed in our state after practicing elsewhere. I even searched disciplinary records in case she'd had her license suspended or revoked. After 3 hours of thorough searching through every available database and cross-reference system, I found no evidence that Patricia Whitman was legally authorized to practice law in our state or any neighboring jurisdiction. The implications hit me like a freight train derailing at full speed. If Patricia wasn't a licensed attorney, then everything she'd told my ex-husband, everything she'd used to build her credibility, social status, and relationship with my daughter, was an elaborate fabrication designed to deceive and manipulate. But I needed more concrete evidence before I could confront anyone with these discoveries. Accusations without ironclad proof would make me look like a desperate, jealous ex-wife trying to sabotage my former husband's happiness out of spite and resentment. I decided to investigate her workplace directly, despite the risks involved. The following Tuesday, I called in sick to the diner, losing a day's wages I couldn't afford to sacrifice, and drove downtown to the offices of Hendricks, Moore & Associates. The building was everything I'd expected from the photographs on their website. 38 floors of gleaming glass and polished steel rising majestically from the heart of the financial district. Its lobby featuring imported marble floors, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, and security guards who looked like they could intimidate corporate raiders. I approached the main reception desk, my heart pounding with nervous energy and my palms sweating despite the building's perfectly controlled climate. "Excuse me?" I said to the impeccably dressed woman behind the polished granite counter, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I'm here to see Patricia Whitman about a potential legal matter. I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping she might have a few minutes to discuss my situation." The receptionist's perfectly applied makeup didn't hide her immediate confusion, as she consulted her computer terminal with practiced efficiency. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name working here," she said politely, her voice carrying the kind of professional courtesy that expensive law firms train their staff to maintain. "Are you certain you have the correct firm? Perhaps you're thinking of another law office in the building or downtown area." "She's definitely an attorney here," I insisted, feeling my heart rate accelerate as panic began to set in. "Corporate Litigation Department. She specializes in merger negotiations and has been working here for over 2 years. Patricia Whitman. She's being considered for senior partner." The receptionist checked her computer system again, her French manicured nails clicking against the keyboard with practiced efficiency, while her expression remained diplomatically neutral. "No, I'm sorry. There's absolutely no Patricia Whitman employed by this firm in any capacity," she said with increasing certainty. "I've been working here for 5 years, and I can assure you that no one by that name has ever been on our staff. You might have us confused with another law office, or perhaps she works for one of the other firms in this building complex." My mouth went completely dry as the implications of what she was telling me began to sink in. Could there be another Patricia Whitman working at a different prestigious firm in the city? Was it possible my research had been incomplete, or that I'd somehow gotten confused about which law office employed her? "What about Patricia White?" I asked desperately, grasping for any explanation that would make sense of the situation. "Or maybe she goes by her maiden name or a different professional name for some reason." "I'm sorry," the receptionist said with increasing concern about my agitated state, "but I can't provide detailed information about our employees or staff to unauthorized visitors for security and privacy reasons. If you'd like to leave your contact information with our client services department, I can have someone call you back to discuss your legal needs and refer you to an appropriate attorney." I thanked her and left the building as quickly as possible, my mind racing as I tried to process what I'd just learned. Patricia didn't work for Hendricks, Moore & Associates. She'd never attended Harvard Law School. She wasn't licensed to practice law in our state. Everything she'd told my ex-husband, every credential she'd used to build her image as a successful, accomplished professional woman, was completely and utterly fabricated. But if she wasn't really a lawyer, what was her actual job? How was she maintaining this elaborate deception without anyone in her daily life discovering the truth? And most importantly, what did this mean for my ex-husband's finances and my daughter's future? I spent the next 3 weeks conducting the most thorough and methodical investigation of my life. I followed Patricia from our neighborhood to her real workplace, documented her daily routine through careful observation, and slowly assembled a comprehensive picture of her actual existence versus the elaborate fantasy she'd constructed to deceive my family. The truth was even more shocking and disturbing than I'd initially. Patricia's real job was at the Eastside Community Legal Aid Clinic, a small nonprofit organization housed in a converted strip mall on the less affluent side of town. She worked there as a paralegal, earning $18 per hour to help low-income clients navigate basic legal problems like landlord-tenant disputes, simple divorce proceedings, immigration paperwork, and social services applications. I watched her arrive every morning at 8:30 in business casual clothes purchased from discount retailers, not the designer suits she claimed to wear to her corner office, and leave promptly at 5 o'clock carrying a worn canvas messenger bag instead of an expensive leather briefcase. During her lunch breaks, she ate sandwiches from home in the clinic's break room rather than attending power lunches with corporate clients at expensive downtown restaurants. The legal aid clinic specialized in helping disadvantaged populations access basic legal services they couldn't otherwise afford. It was honorable, necessary work that served an important community function, but it was a far cry from the high-stakes corporate litigation and million-dollar merger negotiations she described in such elaborate detail to my ex-husband and daughter. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Patricia was living a completely double life that extended far beyond her fabricated professional identity. The BMW she drove wasn't registered in her name. It belonged to her elderly aunt, Margaret Whitfield, whose credit cards and bank accounts Patricia had apparently been using without authorization to fund her expensive lifestyle and maintain her facade of success. The sprawling suburban mansion where my ex-husband believed they lived together as a successful power couple, it was Margaret's house, a property the elderly woman had owned for 30 years before suffering a debilitating stroke 6 months earlier. Margaret had recently moved to a specialized assisted living facility for stroke patients, leaving the family home temporarily vacant, while her relatives decided whether to sell it or rent it out. Patricia was essentially house-sitting her incapacitated aunt's property and using the impressive residence to perpetuate her illusion of wealth, success, and social status. She'd moved my ex-husband into a house that didn't belong to her, using someone else's furniture, art collection, and luxury amenities to create a lifestyle that existed only through deception and probable elder abuse. But my investigation revealed something even more sinister and systematic than simple fraud or identity theft. This wasn't Patricia's first time running this particular type of long-term confidence scheme targeting vulnerable divorced men. I hired a private investigator using money I'd borrowed from my sister. Money I absolutely couldn't afford to spend, but that I knew might be the only way to save my family from complete financial and emotional destruction. The investigator was a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases, and within 2 weeks he'd compiled a comprehensive report that read like something from a psychological thriller about systematic predatory behavior. Patricia's real name was Patricia Ann Whitfield, not Patricia Whitman, as she told my ex-husband. Over the past 8 years, she'd operated identical sophisticated schemes in 3 different states, each time targeting recently divorced men with children and substantial financial assets who were emotionally vulnerable following difficult separations and custody battles. Her method was extraordinarily sophisticated and methodical, refined through years of practice and successful execution. First, she'd research potential targets through social media platforms, public records, divorce filings, and community information, identifying men who were emotionally devastated following difficult divorces and who possessed significant assets that could be exploited over time. She'd create elaborate false professional identities, always as successful career women who could match or exceed their target's social and economic status, then infiltrate their social circles through carefully orchestrated chance meetings at gyms, coffee shops, professional networking events, or children's activities. She'd spend weeks or months studying their interests, values, and emotional needs before making contact, ensuring that her false persona would appeal specifically to their psychological vulnerabilities. Once she'd successfully established romantic relationships based on shared interests and values she'd researched extensively in advance, she'd slowly begin moving into their homes and lives while gradually gaining access to their financial accounts, credit cards, business information, and legal documents. Simultaneously, she'd begin the systematic psychological manipulation of their children, turning them against their fathers through a combination of expensive gifts, false promises, and carefully crafted lies about their father's character and capabilities. The investigator had located 3 previous victims across Arizona, Oregon, and Tennessee, each of whom told essentially the same heartbreaking story. Patricia had presented herself as a successful professional, a pediatric surgeon in Phoenix, a financial advisor in Portland, and a university professor in Nashville. She'd moved into their homes, gained access to their financial resources, then systematically drained their accounts while psychologically manipulating their children and isolating them from friends and family support systems. In Phoenix, she'd convinced her target to give her power of attorney over his medical practice accounts, while she was allegedly traveling for surgical conferences and continuing education seminars. Over the course of 18 months, she transferred over $200,000 to offshore accounts in cryptocurrency investments before disappearing one weekend while he was visiting his hospitalized elderly father in another state. When Dr. Marcus Rodriguez discovered the theft, his medical practice was facing bankruptcy, and his 2 teenage sons had been so thoroughly manipulated that they refused to believe their father's accusations against Patricia. She'd convinced them that their father was mentally unstable and trying to destroy her career out of jealousy. It took 3 years of family therapy before his sons would speak to him again, and his medical practice never recovered from the financial devastation. In Portland, she'd used her victims' personal information and identity to secure multiple credit cards and personal loans, purchasing expensive jewelry, electronics, and luxury goods that she later sold through online marketplaces and private sales. Michael Thompson, a successful architect, discovered the fraud only when his business partner called to ask why their company credit cards had been declined during a crucial client dinner. By the time he investigated, Patricia had completely destroyed his credit rating and left him facing personal bankruptcy while fighting for custody of his children who'd been systematically turned against him. She'd told his 10-year-old daughter that her father was gambling away their college funds, and his teenage son that Michael was planning to abandon them for a younger woman. The psychological damage to the children was so severe that both required intensive therapy, and his daughter still suffered from anxiety attacks 3 years later. In Nashville, she'd convinced her target that his teenage daughter was psychologically unstable and needed intensive therapy at a private residential treatment facility that cost thousands of dollars per month. While the girl was away at the expensive treatment center Patricia had researched and recommended, she'd liquidated his investment portfolio, emptied his business accounts, and fled the state with nearly $500,000 in stolen assets. Professor David Chen, who taught philosophy at Vanderbilt University, had trusted Patricia completely when she expressed concern about his daughter's emotional problems following her mother's death from cancer. The treatment facility was real and prestigious, but Patricia had convinced him that his daughter needed to be completely isolated from family influences during her recovery. For 6 months, he was allowed only supervised phone calls, while Patricia systematically stole everything he'd worked for over 20 years. When his daughter finally returned home, she was psychologically devastated by months of unnecessary treatment for problems she'd never had, and her father was financially ruined. Patricia had convinced the treatment facility that David was emotionally abusive, and that contact with him would harm his daughter's recovery. The girl spent months believing her father had abandoned her during the most difficult period of her life. Each time, Patricia had left behind emotionally devastated men and psychologically damaged children who'd been systematically manipulated into rejecting their fathers through months of careful grooming, expensive gifts, and sophisticated lies about their parents' character, capabilities, and love for them. The most chilling discovery was that this pattern of predatory behavior wasn't random or opportunistic. It was a carefully developed system that Patricia had refined and perfected over nearly a decade of successful criminal activity. She'd become expert at identifying vulnerable targets, creating believable false identities complete with fake credentials and professional histories, and executing long-term financial fraud while simultaneously destroying family relationships and psychological bonds between parents and children. My ex-husband was simply her latest victim, following a script she'd used successfully 3 times before with devastating effectiveness. She was currently in the process of implementing the same systematic approach that had destroyed 3 other families and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from trusting men who'd believed they'd found love and partnership after devastating divorces. But there was one crucial difference this time that Patricia hadn't anticipated or planned for. Unlike her previous victims, who'd been isolated and friendless following their divorces, my ex-husband still had me in his life as a co-parent and concerned observer. I wasn't blinded by romantic attachment or sexual manipulation. I had no emotional investment in believing her lies or maintaining her deceptions. And I absolutely wasn't going to let her destroy my family without a fight that would expose her crimes and protect other potential victims from suffering the same fate. The question was how to expose her elaborate deception without seeming like a vindictive ex-wife trying to sabotage her former husband's happiness out of jealousy, spite, or resentment about his apparent upgrade to a more successful partner. I needed to present the evidence in a way that would force him to confront the truth himself without being able to dismiss my discoveries as fabricated revenge or motivated by personal animosity. Patricia was skilled at psychological manipulation and had already laid groundwork to discredit me if I ever challenged her. She'd been telling my ex-husband for months that I was unstable, jealous, and potentially dangerous to Iris's emotional well-being. If I came forward with accusations against her, she could easily convince him that I was manufacturing evidence out of desperation or mental illness. I spent several sleepless nights planning my approach with the strategic precision of a military operation. A direct confrontation would allow Patricia to spin the situation, potentially convincing my ex-husband that I was hiring investigators to create false information designed to break up his marriage. She'd already demonstrated her ability to manipulate reality and convince people to believe her version of events over objective evidence. I needed him to discover the truth himself, or at least to participate actively in uncovering it, so he couldn't later claim I'd fabricated everything or manipulated the evidence to support false conclusions. The opportunity came when he called me on a Thursday evening, ostensibly to discuss Iris's school schedule and upcoming parent-teacher conferences, but actually to gauge my reaction to Patricia's latest proposal about permanent custody arrangements. Patricia thinks it might be beneficial for Iris to spend the entire school year with us instead of continuing these disruptive custody exchanges, he said in that carefully neutral tone he'd perfected for discussing sensitive topics. She's concerned about the instability of your living situation and believes a more consistent environment would be better for Iris's academic performance and emotional development. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm and supportive despite the rage and terror building in my chest like a pressure cooker ready to explode. I've actually been thinking about Patricia myself lately, I said carefully, injecting warmth and admiration into my voice. Iris talks about her so much, and I realize I don't really know anything substantive about her work or professional background. I'd love to learn more about her career achievements. Maybe we could surprise her with something special to celebrate her recent promotion and recognition. His voice brightened immediately with genuine pleasure and surprise. That's really thoughtful and mature of you, he said. I know she'd appreciate the gesture, especially coming from you. She's been worried that you might resent her success or feel threatened by her relationship with Iris. Not at all, I lied smoothly. I want Iris to have strong female role models, and Patricia obviously represents the kind of professional achievement and personal success that any woman would admire. What firm did you say she worked for again? And what specific type of corporate law does she practice? Hendricks, Moore, and Associates, he said with unmistakable pride. Corporate litigation, specializing in merger negotiations and restructuring deals. She's being seriously considered for senior partner next year, which would make her the youngest person ever promoted to that level in the firm's history. That's absolutely incredible, I said, injecting enthusiasm and awe into my voice while my stomach churned with the knowledge of what I'd already discovered. You know, my friend Rachel's sister works downtown in the legal district, and I bet she knows Patricia's reputation in the professional community. It really is a small world in specialized fields like corporate law, isn't it? What's Patricia's full name again? I want to make sure I get all the details right when I ask Rachel about her. Patricia Whitman, he said without the slightest hesitation or concern. Perfect, I said. Let me reach out to Rachel tonight and see what she can tell me about Patricia's work and professional reputation. Maybe we can plan something really special and meaningful to acknowledge her achievements and show her how much we appreciate everything she's doing for our family. Over the next hour, I carefully guided him through a series of seemingly innocent questions about Patricia's background, education, and career history. Each detail he provided matched exactly what Patricia had told him and what Iris had been repeating for months. Harvard Law School, magna cum laude, prestigious positions at multiple firms, groundbreaking cases that had established her reputation as one of the most promising young attorneys in the state. The next morning, I called him back with carefully rehearsed surprise and confusion in my voice. I talked to Rachel last night, and the strangest thing happened, I said, allowing genuine bewilderment to color my tone. Her sister has worked in that building for years and knows people at most of the major firms, but she's never heard of Patricia Whitman. She even checked with some colleagues who specialize in corporate law, and nobody recognizes the name or remembers anyone matching her description. There was a long, uncomfortable pause before he responded, and I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. That seems unusual, he said slowly. Maybe she hasn't had much interaction with attorneys from other firms yet, or maybe Patricia keeps a low profile in the professional community. That's exactly what I thought too, I said agreeably. But then Rachel's sister offered to help me contact someone at Hendricks, more directly, to coordinate this surprise we're planning for Patricia. When she called over there yesterday afternoon, the receptionist told her that no Patricia Whitman works at the firm. Another pause, significantly longer this time, filled with the sound of his increasingly labored breathing. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction and carried a note of rising panic. I've seen her business cards with the firm's logo. I've dropped her off at that building myself, dozens of times. I know, I said gently, maintaining a tone of shared confusion rather than accusation. That's exactly why I thought there must be some kind of misunderstanding or mix-up. Maybe she goes by a different name at work for professional reasons, or maybe there's another Patricia at the firm who's not listed in the main directory system. I could hear him struggling to find logical explanations for information that didn't make sense within the framework of everything he believed about his wife's identity and career. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation, he said, but his voice trembled slightly with doubt and fear. Of course there is, I agreed supportively. Why don't we just drive over there together this afternoon and clear this whole thing up? I'd love to see her office and meet some of her colleagues so I can better understand the work she's doing and the environment where Iris might be spending time. That evening, we met in the parking garage beneath the Hendricks Moore and Associates building. My ex-husband looked haggard and nervous, like a man who was beginning to suspect his carefully constructed world might be built on fundamentally unstable foundations that were starting to shift and crack. We rode the elevator to the 37th floor in uncomfortable silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what we might discover and how it would change everything we thought we knew about Patricia and our family situation. The law firm's reception area was even more impressive than I'd remembered from my previous visit. All polished Italian marble, expensive contemporary artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the city skyline that reinforced the firm's image as a place where only the most successful and powerful people conducted business. The same professional receptionist I'd spoken with weeks earlier greeted us with practiced courtesy and genuine concern for our obvious emotional distress. "Good evening," she said with a warm smile designed to put anxious clients at ease. "How can our firm help you today?" "We're here to see Patricia Whitman," my ex-husband said with forced confidence that didn't mask the tremor in his voice. "I'm her husband, and this is her stepdaughter's mother. We wanted to surprise her at work and maybe meet some of her colleagues." The receptionist's expression didn't change, but I could see recognition in her eyes as she looked at me, the same woman who'd asked about Patricia weeks earlier. "I'm sorry, but as I mentioned to this lady several weeks ago, we don't have anyone named Patricia Whitman working here," she said diplomatically. "Perhaps you're thinking of a different firm?" My ex-husband's face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks as if someone had opened a valve and let all the blood flow out. "That's impossible," he said, his voice rising slightly with panic and confusion. "She's a senior associate here, corporate litigation department. She's been working here for over 2 years and is being considered for partnership." The receptionist consulted her computer terminal with patient professionalism, her fingers moving efficiently across the keyboard as she searched through every possible database and directory. "Sir, I've been working here for 5 years, and I can assure you that no Patricia Whitman has ever been employed by this firm in any capacity," she said with gentle firmness. "I know every attorney, paralegal, and staff member who's worked here during my tenure. Would you like me to check if perhaps she works for one of the other law offices in this building complex?" I watched my ex-husband's carefully constructed world begin to crumble in real time. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone to call Patricia's work number, the direct line she'd given him to her supposed private office on the 37th floor. The phone rang several times before an automated message informed him that the number was no longer in service. "We need to talk," I said quietly. "Let's go somewhere private." For the next 3 hours, we sat in a coffee shop across the street from the law firm while I slowly walked him through everything I'd discovered. The false Harvard credentials, the non-existent bar license, the real job at the legal aid clinic, the financial fraud involving her aunt's accounts and identity. With each revelation, he seemed to age visibly before my eye. The man who'd been so confident about his new life, so certain that he'd traded up from his mundane ex-wife to a sophisticated professional woman who represented everything he'd wanted to become, was forced to confront the possibility that everything he believed was an elaborate lie, constructed to deceive and exploit him. But I saved the most devastating evidence for last. I handed him the private investigator's report detailing Patricia's history of targeting divorced men in other states, her systematic approach to financial fraud, and the psychological damage she'd inflicted on previous victims and their children. As he read through the documented pattern of predatory behavior spanning multiple states and nearly a decade, his hands began to shake uncontrollably. "She's done this before," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the coffee shop's ambient noise. "To other families, other children, other men just like me." I nodded gravely. The investigator found 3 previous victims. Each time she followed the exact same pattern: false professional identity, gradual financial exploitation, systematic alienation of children from their fathers. He looked up at me with haunted eyes that reflected a man confronting the complete destruction of everything he'd believed about his life and future. "How much money has she taken from me?" he asked, his voice hollow with dread. I helped him access his bank accounts and credit reports using his phone. What we found was even worse than I'd expected. Over the past 14 months, Patricia had systematically drained nearly $78,000 from his business and personal accounts through a combination of direct transfers, unauthorized credit card purchases, fraudulent loans secured using his identity, and cryptocurrency investments made without his knowledge. She'd been incredibly sophisticated in her approach, taking small amounts regularly rather than large sums that might trigger suspicion or automatic fraud alerts. She'd also been careful to forge his signature on documents and use his personal information to open new accounts and credit lines without his knowledge or consent. Most insidiously, she'd convinced him that many of these financial decisions were his own ideas. When he'd questioned unusual expenses or unfamiliar charges, she'd reminded him of conversations they'd supposedly had about investments, home improvements, or business opportunities. Conversations that had never actually taken place, but that she'd described with such convincing detail and emotional manipulation that he'd begun to doubt his own memory and perception of reality. "This is psychological manipulation at a professional level," I said as gently as possible, while he stared at the evidence of his financial devastation. "She's not just a con artist. She's someone who understands how to systematically destroy a person's ability to trust their own perceptions and memories." The victims the investigator interviewed described the same thing. "She makes you doubt your own mind." That night, he went home to confront Patricia with the evidence I'd gathered. I waited anxiously by my phone, knowing that everything depended on how she responded to being exposed and whether she'd try to manipulate the situation one final time. He called me at 2 a.m, his voice shattered and raw. "She's gone," he said. "Everything. All her clothes, her jewelry, her personal items. She cleaned out what was left in my accounts and disappeared. She left a note saying she had a family emergency, but when I called her aunt's nursing home, they said Margaret died 3 weeks ago." The house was empty except for the furniture that had belonged to Patricia's aunt. The BMW was found abandoned at the airport with the keys in the ignition. Patricia Whitfield had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only financial devastation and psychological trauma. The next morning, he brought Iris to my apartment. My daughter looked confused, hurt, and fundamentally shaken by the discovery that the woman who'd become her role model and psychological anchor had been a complete fabrication. "Is it true?" she asked me, her voice small and uncertain. "Patricia isn't really a lawyer? Everything she told me was a lie?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, sitting beside her on our old couch and taking her hands in mine. She was pretending to be someone she wasn't. She lied about her job, her education, her background, everything. "But she showed me all those case files," Iris said, confusion and betrayal evident in her young voice. "She talked about her clients and her big cases. She knew so much about law and business. She stole those files from her real job as a paralegal," I explained gently. "She used them to make herself seem more important and successful than she really was." Iris sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the magnitude of the deception. "So everything she said about you being a failure," she said slowly, "was coming from someone who was lying about everything in her own life." "That's right," I said. "Someone who had to steal another person's identity and house and car to pretend to be successful." Dad nodded, his face etched with guilt and shame. "Your mom works harder than anyone I know," he said quietly. "She raised you while I was building my career. She held our family together when I wasn't capable of it. I was a fool for not seeing that Patricia was trying to destroy something real and valuable." Over the following weeks, we slowly began to rebuild our fractured family relationships. My ex-husband used what remained of his assets to pay for family therapy and establish a college fund for Iris. He moved into a modest apartment and took a second job to recover from the financial devastation Patricia had inflicted. During one of our therapy sessions, Iris looked at me with newfound understanding. "Mom, can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course, honey. Do you think I'll be successful like you when I grow up?" I stopped breathing for a moment. "Like me?" "Yeah," she said with growing conviction. "Dad told me what you did to catch Patricia, how you investigated everything and saved him from getting hurt even worse, how you didn't give up even when everyone thought you were just being jealous." "Anyone could have done that research, sweetheart," I said. "No," she said firmly. "Patricia counted on people not caring enough to look deeper. She counted on people not fighting for their families. But you cared enough to find the truth, even when it was hard, even when everyone thought you were wrong." I hugged her tightly, feeling years of accumulated pain and inadequacy begin to dissolve. "I'd do anything to protect the people I love," I said. "I know," she replied. "That's what makes you successful. You don't give up on people. You don't give up on what matters." 6 months later, Patricia was arrested in another state while running an identical scheme on a recently divorced doctor. The evidence I'd gathered helped convict her of multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Her previous victims testified at the sentencing hearing about the devastation she'd caused to their families and children. The judge called her one of the most calculating and destructive criminals he'd encountered in 30 years on the bench. That evening, Iris and I celebrated by cooking dinner together in our small kitchen above the laundromat. She was helping me with my college homework. I'd enrolled in online classes to finish my degree, while telling me about her science project. As we walked to visit Dad for dinner, he'd asked us to come celebrate Iris making honor roll. She slipped her hand into mine. "Mom, I'm sorry I said those things about you being a failure. You were just repeating what you heard," I said. "That wasn't your fault. But I should have known better," she said seriously. "You never give up. Even when things are impossible, you keep fighting. That's not failing. That's what real strength looks like." I squeezed her hand. "That's the most important thing you'll ever learn, sweetheart. Success isn't about what you have or what other people think you should be. It's about what you do when everything goes wrong. It's about protecting the people you love, no matter what it costs you." She nodded with the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and discovering what really matters. As we walked toward Dad's apartment, I realized something fundamental had changed inside me. I wasn't ashamed of our life anymore. Our small apartment, my waitressing job, our secondhand furniture, none of it defined my worth or my success as a mother and a human being. My determination did. My love for my daughter did. My refusal to be defeated by someone who tried to destroy us did. Patricia had tried to make me feel like a failure by comparing me to an elaborate lie, but the truth was simpler and more powerful. I'd never failed at anything that truly mattered. I'd raised a good kid, survived a difficult divorce, and built a meaningful life from nothing. When someone tried to take that away from me, I fought back with the only weapons I had: patience, persistence, and an unshakable belief that the truth would eventually set us all free. In the end, I didn't just take everything away from Patricia. I took back everything she'd tried to steal from me: my daughter's love, my family's future, and my own sense of worth and purpose. The woman who'd called me a failure had built her entire existence on lies, theft, and the systematic destruction of other people's lives. I built mine on love, sacrifice, and the determination to protect what mattered most. I knew which kind of success I wanted my daughter to learn from.